The first rays of sunrise found me sitting on an old wooden pier, watching the golden light slowly spread across the waters of Charleston Harbor. In my hands was a worn envelope with faded edges, one I had opened more times than I could count. Inside was a letter I already knew by heart. Most people would probably say it was time to let go of the past. But how do you let go of the person who changed every part of who you are? That is why I decided to tell my story today. Not because I want sympathy, and not because I need anyone to take my side. I simply want you to understand that sometimes the greatest love of your life finds you only after you've completely stopped looking for it. My name is Logan Whitmore. I was 29 years old then, and from the outside, my life looked exactly the way most people would want theirs to look. I worked as an architect for a respected design firm in Charleston, South Carolina. I owned a small house not far from the ocean, had a steady career, loyal friends, and enough money to live comfortably. If someone had asked me whether I was successful, I probably would have said yes. But success has a strange way of hiding loneliness. Every evening, after spending hours designing homes that would one day be filled with laughter and families, I returned to a house that greeted me with silence. There was no one waiting to ask how my day had gone. No one to laugh with over dinner or argue with about what movie to watch. Just quiet rooms, and the sound of the waves drifting through my open windows. After a couple of failed relationships, I convinced myself that love simply wasn't meant for everyone. Dating had started to feel exhausting. Too many conversations revolved around appearances, careers, and social media instead of genuine connection. Eventually, I stopped trying. I told myself that love was just another beautiful story that happened to other people. One Saturday morning, I decided to visit the local farmers market in downtown Charleston. It had become one of my favorite places to escape from work. Fresh flowers filled the sidewalks with color, local musicians played jazz on street corners, and the smell of warm pastries mixed with freshly brewed coffee in the air. There was something comforting about the place. Nobody seemed to be in a hurry. I planned to grab a cup of coffee, walk around for a while, and head back home. Instead, that morning changed my life. As I stood near one of the coffee stands, I heard a soft laugh behind me. I don't know why I turned around. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fate. A few yards away stood a young woman browsing through a table covered with old books. The gentle breeze played with her dark chestnut hair, while the morning sunlight highlighted the warm smile on her face. She looked completely absorbed in what she was doing, almost as if the busy crowd around her had disappeared. For reasons I still can't explain, I couldn't look away. It felt strangely familiar, like seeing someone I had somehow known long before we had actually met. Then everything happened in a matter of seconds. The bookstore owner accidentally bumped into one of the display boxes. Several heavy books slid off the table and scattered across the ground. Without thinking, both of us rushed forward to help. We reached for the very same book at exactly the same moment. Our hands touched. She smiled and quickly pulled hers back. "I guess this book can't decide who it belongs to," she said with a quiet laugh. I smiled before I even realized what I was about to say. Maybe it just wanted an excuse to introduce us. She laughed again, this time even brighter. "That's actually a pretty good opening line. I'm Logan. Natalie Hayes." We shook hands properly this time. While helping the owner gather the books, we started talking. The conversation flowed so naturally that it almost felt impossible we had only known each other for a few minutes. Natalie told me she worked as a photographer. She specialized in capturing travel, city life, and ordinary people living ordinary moments. "My favorite pictures," she said, "are never the perfect ones. They're the unexpected moments that most people never notice." I looked at her curiously. "Like what?" She smiled. A grandfather teaching his grandson how to feed birds in the park. A couple holding hands after 40 years together. A child laughing because a butterfly landed on their shoulder. She paused before adding quietly, "People spend so much time chasing extraordinary moments that they forget how beautiful ordinary ones can be." Those words stayed with me. They didn't sound rehearsed or poetic. They sounded true. Before I realized it, nearly 40 minutes had passed. Neither of us had looked at our phones once. There were no awkward silences, no forced jokes, and no need to pretend to be someone we weren't. For the first time in years, talking to someone felt effortless. Before we said goodbye, Natalie picked up the same book that had brought us together. She looked down at its worn cover and smiled. "You know, I think this book is always going to remind me of today." I couldn't help smiling back. "I have a feeling I'll remember today for a very long time, too." For a brief moment, she hesitated. Then she looked at me with a small, hopeful smile. "So, how about coffee next week?" I felt something shift inside me. Just a few hours earlier, I had been convinced that fate wasn't real, that unexpected love belonged only in movies and novels. Yet there I was, standing in the middle of a crowded market, realizing that sometimes an ordinary morning is all it takes for your entire life to begin moving in a completely different direction. "I'd like that," I answered. She smiled one last time before walking away through the narrow streets lined with market stalls. I watched her disappear into the crowd, completely unaware that this chance encounter would become the beginning of the happiest, and eventually the most heartbreaking, chapter of my life. Ahead of us waited unforgettable adventures, moments that would make us believe love could conquer anything, painful trials that would test every promise we made, and choices capable of changing two lives forever. The following week felt longer than any I could remember. It wasn't because work had suddenly become more difficult or because something unusual had happened. It was because for the first time in years, I genuinely looked forward to something that had nothing to do with deadlines, promotions, or responsibilities. Every morning I caught myself wondering if Natalie was thinking about our conversation the same way I was. I even laughed at myself more than once. At 29 years old, I felt like a teenager waiting for his very first date. When Friday finally arrived, I left the office earlier than usual. I went home, changed into a navy blue shirt and dark jeans, and spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding whether I should wear my leather jacket or leave it in the closet. Eventually, I reminded myself that this wasn't a job interview. It was just coffee. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself. We agreed to meet at a small cafe overlooking the Ashley River. It wasn't one of those expensive places where everyone seemed afraid to make noise. It was cozy, with brick walls, wooden tables, shelves full of books, and soft acoustic music playing in the background. When I walked inside, Natalie was already there. She was sitting near the window with a steaming mug in front of her, absent-mindedly watching boats drift across the river. The afternoon sunlight reflected in her hazel eyes, making them seem almost golden. She noticed me and smiled. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I wasn't going to miss this." For some reason, those simple words made her smile even wider. We ordered coffee and started talking almost immediately, as if we were continuing a conversation that had only paused for a few minutes instead of an entire week. Unlike most first dates, there were no uncomfortable questions, no rehearsed stories, no pretending to be perfect. Natalie told me she had grown up in Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by mountains and forests. Her father had been a park ranger, and her mother taught art at a local high school. She laughed while describing childhood weekends spent hiking instead of watching television. "I used to complain about it," she admitted. "And now I'd give anything to go back for just one afternoon." I understood exactly what she meant. I told her about growing up near the South Carolina coast with my older brother, Mason. We spent entire summers building tree houses, fishing from old docks, and dreaming about becoming explorers. "We never explored much," I laughed, "but we built some terrible tree houses." Natalie laughed so hard that a few people turned toward us. "I'm sorry," she said between laughs. "No, you're not." "No, not really." Hours passed without either of us noticing. At one point, she reached into her canvas bag and pulled out an old camera. Not a digital one. A film camera. "You still use film?" I asked. "I do." "Why?" She gently ran her fingers across the metal body before answering. "Because film teaches patience." I looked at her confused. "You don't know whether the picture is perfect until days later," she explained. "You can't delete mistakes. You simply trust the moment." Those words settled somewhere deep inside me. Trust the moment. It sounded like advice I didn't realize I needed. After we finished our coffee, Natalie looked outside. "It's too beautiful to go home. So what do you suggest?" She smiled mischievously. "Walk with me." We spent the next 2 hours wandering through Charleston's historic streets. The city looked different through her eyes. She noticed details I had walked past hundreds of times without ever seeing. An old blue door with peeling paint. A tiny flower growing between cracked bricks. A musician playing violin beneath an oak tree. Every few minutes she'd stop, lift her camera, and quietly capture another photograph. "What do you see that I don't?" I finally asked. She lowered the camera. "I look for stories. In buildings. In people." She pointed toward an elderly couple sitting on a bench. They're holding hands. So, they've probably been through decades together. She turned toward a young father chasing his little daughter through a nearby square. He's pretending he can't catch her. I smiled. He obviously can. I know, but he'll let her win because she'll remember that feeling for years. I looked around again. For the first time, I noticed what she meant. Every person carried a story, invisible to everyone else. Every smile had a reason. Every scar had a beginning. As evening approached, we reached the waterfront. The sunset painted the sky with shades of orange, pink, and deep purple. Sailboats drifted slowly across the harbor, while seagulls circled overhead. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence didn't feel awkward. It felt comfortable. Finally, Natalie broke it. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. When was the last time you were truly happy?" The question caught me completely off guard. I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. I realized I honestly didn't know. Not because my life had been bad. Because I had spent so much time planning my future that I had forgotten to enjoy my present. She seemed to understand my silence. "You don't have to answer." I finally said quietly. "I think it might be today." She looked at me without saying a word. Then she smiled. Not the polite smile people give strangers. Not the excited smile from earlier. This one was softer, warmer, more genuine. "I'm glad," she whispered. As darkness slowly settled over Charleston, we walked back toward the parking lot. Neither of us seemed eager to say goodbye. Before getting into her car, Natalie turned toward me. "I had a really wonderful day." "So did I." She hesitated. "Would you like to have dinner with me next weekend?" I smiled. "I was actually hoping you'd ask." She laughed. "I was hoping you'd say yes." As she drove away, I stood there watching the taillights disappear into the evening traffic. For years, I had believed that love arrived with fireworks, dramatic speeches, and impossible coincidences. But standing alone beneath the glowing streetlights, I began to understand something far more beautiful. Sometimes love doesn't rush into your life. Sometimes it walks beside you through quiet streets, shares an ordinary cup of coffee, asks unexpected questions, and slowly teaches your heart how to feel alive again. And without realizing it, I had already started falling in love with Natalie Hayes. By the time our third weekend together arrived, something had already changed inside me. I no longer checked my phone out of habit. I checked it because I hoped there would be a message from Natalie. Every morning seemed brighter. Even my coworkers noticed the difference. "You've been smiling a lot lately," my friend and colleague Daniel said one afternoon as we reviewed blueprints. "Have I?" He laughed. "You don't even realize you're doing it." I looked down at the plans spread across my desk, trying to hide my grin. Maybe life's just been good. Daniel leaned back in his chair. "That sounds suspicious." It probably is. For the first time in years, work no longer felt like the center of my world. I still loved designing buildings, but now every day had something even better waiting at the end of it: a phone call, a walk, or simply hearing Natalie's voice. The following Saturday, she invited me to join her on a road trip. "Where are we going?" I asked over the phone. "If I tell you," she replied, "it won't be an adventure." I don't usually agree to mysterious invitations. Then start. There was something irresistible about the excitement in her voice. The next morning, she pulled into my driveway just after sunrise in her silver Jeep Wrangler. The windows were down, music drifted from the speakers, and she greeted me with the same warm smile that had become my favorite sight. "Ready?" "I have absolutely no idea where you're taking me." "Perfect." We drove for nearly 2 hours along quiet coastal roads lined with towering oak trees draped in Spanish moss. The farther we traveled from Charleston, the more peaceful everything became. Eventually, Natalie turned onto a narrow dirt road that ended near an almost deserted beach. There were no crowds, no restaurants, no souvenir shops, only endless white sand, rolling waves, and the sound of the Atlantic Ocean. I looked around in amazement. I've lived here for years. I've never seen this place. She smiled proudly. That's because most people stop looking once they find the popular beaches. We spent the morning walking barefoot along the shoreline. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we simply listened to the waves. Neither of us felt the need to fill every silence. At one point, Natalie bent down and picked up a small seashell. "Do you know why I love the ocean?" she asked. I shook my head. "Because it never pretends." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "When it's calm, everyone admires it. When it's stormy, everyone fears it. But it's always honest about what it is." I thought about those words as another wave rolled toward our feet. Honest. That was exactly how I felt whenever I was with her. I didn't need to impress her. I didn't need to hide my fears or pretend to be stronger than I was. For the first time in a long time, I simply felt like myself. Later that afternoon, we found an old wooden lifeguard tower overlooking the beach. We climbed onto the platform and shared sandwiches Natalie had packed earlier that morning. "You planned all this?" I asked. She shrugged. "I hoped you'd enjoy it. I don't think anyone has ever planned something like this for me." She looked genuinely surprised. "Really?" I nodded. "Most people plan fancy dinners. You planned peace." She smiled quietly. "I think peace is underrated." As the afternoon passed, dark clouds slowly gathered on the horizon. A summer storm was approaching. "We should probably head back," I said. Natalie looked at the sky. "Probably." But neither of us moved. Instead, we watched the rain slowly sweep across the ocean like a gray curtain. The first drops landed only seconds later. Within moments, we were completely soaked. Instead of running, Natalie threw her head back and started laughing. Real laughter. The kind that couldn't be faked. "You've officially lost your mind," I shouted over the rain. "I know." She grabbed my hand. "Come on." Before I realized what was happening, she pulled me toward the shoreline. We ran through the rain like two children who had forgotten the world existed. The cold water splashed around our feet while thunder echoed somewhere far out at sea. I hadn't laughed like that in years. Maybe decades. Eventually, we collapsed onto the wet sand, breathing heavily and staring up at the stormy sky. Natalie turned her head toward me. "When was the last time you did something completely ridiculous?" I laughed. "I honestly can't remember." That's the problem. What is? Adults spend so much time trying to look responsible that they forget how to feel free. Her words settled deep inside me once again. She had a way of saying simple things that somehow changed the way I looked at life. As the rain finally began to fade, a rainbow appeared over the ocean. Neither of us spoke. The moment didn't need words. On the drive back to Charleston, the Jeep smelled of salt water and rain. Our clothes were still damp, and our hair was a mess. Neither of us cared. About halfway home, Natalie turned the music down. "Can I tell you something?" "Always." She kept her eyes on the road. "I almost canceled today." I looked at her in surprise. "Why?" "Because I was scared." "Of what?" She smiled sadly. "Of letting someone become important to me again." I stayed quiet. She continued. "A few years ago, I trusted someone with my whole heart." Her voice became softer. "It didn't end well. I wanted to ask what had happened. Instead, I simply listened. He made promises he never intended to keep." She took a slow breath. "And for a long time, I convinced myself it was safer not to let anyone get close." I gently reached for her hand, resting on the gear shift. She looked at me. I didn't make any promises. I didn't say everything would be okay. Instead, I simply held her hand. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. She squeezed my hand gently. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not asking questions I'm not ready to answer." As Charleston's skyline appeared in the distance, I realized something that both excited and terrified me. This wasn't just another relationship. This wasn't casual attraction. Somewhere between old books, quiet conversations, hidden beaches, and dancing in the rain. I had fallen completely in love with Natalie Hayes. I just didn't know yet that love, no matter how beautiful, could never protect us from the storms that were still waiting beyond the horizon. The weeks that followed became the happiest I could remember. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. I still had demanding projects at work, deadlines that seemed impossible to meet, and mornings when I wished I could stay in bed for another hour. But everything felt lighter because Natalie had become part of my everyday life. We started creating little traditions without even realizing it. Every Tuesday evening, we met at the same food truck by the marina for fish tacos. Every Thursday, she called me during her drive home, and somehow a 10-minute conversation always turned into an hour. On Sunday mornings, we explored places neither of us had visited before, hidden parks, abandoned lighthouses, quiet bookstores, or tiny diners that looked forgotten by time. It wasn't about where we went. It was about being together. One evening, while we were walking through Waterfront Park, Natalie suddenly stopped in front of one of the giant oak trees. "What are you doing?" I asked. She pointed upward. "Look." At first, I didn't notice anything. Then I saw them. Hundreds of tiny lights hanging from the branches. Fireflies. They floated through the warm evening air like little stars that had somehow drifted down from the sky. Natalie smiled. "Most people walk right past this place." I probably have. They're always looking at their phones. I slipped mine into my pocket. "I'd rather look at this." She leaned her head against my shoulder. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence between two people feels uncomfortable. With Natalie, silence felt like home. A few days later, she invited me to an art exhibition where several of her photographs were being displayed. "I'm warning you," she laughed before we went inside. "I hate being the center of attention. You're a photographer. I like being behind the camera." The gallery was filled with landscapes, portraits, and black and white photographs from different artists. But my attention immediately found Natalie's work. There was a photograph of an old fisherman smiling despite the deep wrinkles on his face. Another captured a little girl spinning beneath autumn leaves. One showed a lonely bench overlooking the ocean after a storm. None of the pictures looked staged. They looked real. They looked alive. I stood in front of them longer than anyone else. Natalie quietly walked over. "So," I looked at her, "you don't take pictures?" She frowned playfully. "What do you mean?" "You tell stories without using words." For a moment, she simply stared at me. Then she wrapped her arms around me. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said about my work. Later that evening, an older couple approached us. The man pointed toward one of Natalie's photographs. My wife cried when she saw this one. Natalie looked surprised. "I hope that's a good thing." The woman smiled through watery eyes. It reminded me of the day my husband came home after serving overseas. Natalie covered her mouth with her hand. She didn't know what to say. After the couple walked away, I noticed tears forming in her eyes. "You okay?" She nodded. I never imagined something I created could mean that much to someone else. I gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "It means that because it came from your heart." She looked at me in silence. "I've never met anyone who sees me the way you do." Neither had I. As summer slowly turned toward autumn, our relationship became stronger with every passing day. We met each other's friends. She introduced me to her younger sister, Chloe, who immediately started teasing Natalie. "So you're the famous Logan." Natalie rolled her eyes. "Please ignore her." "I can't." Chloe laughed. "She hasn't stopped talking about you for weeks." Natalie's face turned bright red. "Chloe." "What?" "You have." I couldn't stop smiling. A few days later, I introduced Natalie to my older brother, Mason. After dinner, he pulled me aside while Natalie helped clear the table. "She makes you different." I looked at him. "In a good way." "In the best way." He smiled. "You laugh again." I hadn't even realized that I did. One cool October afternoon, Natalie suggested we drive into the countryside to watch the sunset. We found a quiet hill overlooking endless golden fields. The wind gently moved through the tall grass, while the sky slowly turned shades of orange and crimson. She spread out a blanket. We sat together watching the horizon. "Can I ask you another difficult question?" she said. I laughed. "You seem to enjoy those." "I do." She smiled. "What scares you the most?" I thought for a long time before answering. "Losing someone I love." She looked at me carefully. "Have you ever lost anyone?" "My father." Her expression softened. I was 23. I never really talked about it. "What happened?" "A heart attack." It was sudden. One day we were making plans to go fishing. The next. I couldn't finish the sentence. Natalie quietly took my hand. "You don't have to." For several minutes, we simply sat together watching the sun sink below the horizon. Finally, she whispered, "I think the hardest part about loving someone is knowing that nothing lasts forever." I turned toward her. "Maybe, but that doesn't make love weaker." She looked into my eyes. "No, it makes every moment more valuable." Without thinking, I gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. She closed the distance between us. This time I kissed her. Slowly, carefully, as if the entire world had stopped moving. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine. "I was wondering how long that would take," she whispered with a laugh. "You knew." "I've known for weeks." I smiled. "And you didn't help me?" "Oh, I definitely enjoyed watching you overthink everything." We both laughed. That evening, while driving back toward Charleston beneath a sky full of stars, I felt something I had never experienced before. Not excitement, not infatuation, not simply happiness. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes only when you realize you've found the person who feels like home. As I reached over and intertwined my fingers with Natalie's, I silently made a promise to myself. No matter what life placed in our path, I would protect this love with everything I had. I just didn't know that some battles cannot be won by love alone. Autumn quietly settled over Charleston, painting the streets in warm shades of amber and gold. The summer heat gave way to cool mornings, and every breeze carried the scent of salt water mixed with fallen leaves. Somewhere along the way, Natalie stopped feeling like someone I was dating. She became the person I wanted to share every ordinary moment with. It wasn't the big adventures that brought us closer anymore. It was grocery shopping together, cooking dinner while arguing over which music to play, folding laundry on Sunday evenings, falling asleep on the couch halfway through a movie because we were both too tired to finish it. Those simple moments became my favorite memories. One Friday evening, Natalie invited me to her apartment. "I have a surprise," she said over the phone. When I arrived, the lights inside were dim. Soft jazz played from an old record player, and the smell of homemade lasagna filled the room. "You made all this?" I asked. She smiled proudly. "I wanted tonight to be special." "For what occasion?" She shrugged. "Does love need an occasion?" I laughed. "I guess not." During dinner we talked about everything and nothing. Dream vacations, favorite childhood memories, books we had never finished, embarrassing stories from high school. At one point she disappeared into another room and returned carrying a small wooden box. "I've never shown this to anyone I've dated." She carefully opened it. Inside were dozens of old photographs. Not the ones she had taken professionally. These were personal. Family birthdays, camping trips, Christmas mornings, her parents dancing barefoot in the kitchen, her little sister covered in birthday cake. She handed me one picture. A teenage Natalie sat on a dock holding an old camera nearly as big as she was. "My dad took that." "You already wanted to be a photographer." She smiled. "I was 13. He told me something that day." "What was it?" She looked down at the photograph. "He said, 'Don't take pictures of what people look like. Take pictures of what they feel.'" I stared at the photo for several seconds. "No wonder your work feels so different." She closed the box gently. "I still miss him." I looked at her. "I thought your father was alive." She shook her head slowly. "He passed away 5 years ago." The room suddenly became very quiet. "I'm sorry." "So am I." She smiled sadly. "He was my best friend." Without saying another word, I moved closer and wrapped my arms around her. She rested her head against my chest. "I still expect him to call me sometimes." "I know that feeling." She looked up. You do? I nodded. I still catch myself wanting to tell my dad about good news. She smiled through tears. I guess grief never really leaves. No, it just becomes quieter. For a long time we sat together without speaking. Sometimes healing doesn't happen through conversations. Sometimes it happens because someone simply stays. A few weeks later, Thanksgiving arrived. It would be our first holiday together. Natalie suggested we host dinner instead of traveling. It'll just be us, she said. And that's enough. We spent the entire morning cooking. Or at least trying to. I nearly burned the sweet potatoes. She laughed so hard she almost dropped the pie. You are officially banned from seasoning anything. I was experimenting. You were committing crimes. By the time dinner was finally ready, the kitchen looked like a disaster. Flour covered half the counter. There were dirty dishes everywhere. But neither of us cared. As we sat down to eat, Natalie suddenly became serious. Can we do something first? Of course. She reached across the table and took my hand. Let's each say one thing we're thankful for. I nodded. You first. She looked into my eyes. I'm thankful that I stopped being afraid. I squeezed her hand gently. My turn. She nodded. I smiled. I'm thankful that one morning I decided to visit a farmer's market instead of sleeping in. She laughed. I had a feeling you'd say something like that. Dinner lasted for hours. We talked until the candles burned almost completely down. Later that night, we wrapped ourselves in blankets and sat on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer across the water. The air was cool. Natalie rested her head on my shoulder. Can I tell you a secret? You already know you can. I love Christmas. That's not much of a secret. She smiled. No. What I mean is, I love everything about it. The lights, the music, the smell of pine trees. The feeling that people become kinder for a little while. I looked at her. Then we're going to make this the best Christmas you've ever had. She smiled. You sound very confident. I am. Little did I know how important those words would become. December arrived faster than either of us expected. The city transformed overnight. Every street glowed with lights. Store windows filled with decorations. Music echoed through every square. Natalie insisted we decorate my house together. By the end of the evening there were lights hanging from every window, garlands across the fireplace, and a Christmas tree standing proudly in the corner of my living room. It's beautiful, she whispered. No. I looked at her. You are. She laughed and threw a pillow at me. That was unbelievably cheesy. But effective. It was. She walked over, stood on her tiptoes, and kissed me. When she pulled away, she looked unusually thoughtful. What? She hesitated. I've been thinking about something. I waited. I don't want to rush anything. My heart beat a little faster. But I think. She smiled nervously. I'm falling in love with you. For a brief moment, the entire room seemed to stand still. I reached for both of her hands. Natalie, I've been in love with you for a long time. A tear rolled down her cheek. This time it wasn't sadness. It was relief. She wrapped her arms around me tighter than ever before. Outside, snowflakes, rare but magical for Charleston, began drifting softly through the night sky. Standing there beside the glowing Christmas tree, holding the woman I loved in my arms, I honestly believed life couldn't become more beautiful. I had no way of knowing that fate was quietly preparing the first real test of our love, and that before winter came to an end, everything we had built together would begin to change. Christmas arrived wrapped in a kind of magic I hadn't felt since I was a child. Charleston shimmered beneath thousands of white lights, wreaths decorated nearly every front door, and holiday music drifted through the streets from every cafe and shop. Everywhere we went, people seemed a little kinder, a little more patient, as though the season had reminded everyone of what truly mattered. Natalie was right. There was something special about Christmas. On Christmas Eve, she invited me to her apartment. When I walked inside, the smell of cinnamon, vanilla, and fresh pine immediately filled the air. Candles flickered on the windowsills, soft music played from the living room, and the Christmas tree glowed quietly in the corner. "You've somehow made this place look like a Christmas movie," I said. She laughed. "I've been decorating since 6 this morning." "I believe it." We spent the evening baking cookies that turned out far less impressive than we had imagined. Half of them were burned, the icing was uneven, and one entire tray somehow ended up on the kitchen floor after I accidentally bumped into the counter. Natalie burst into laughter. "I'm beginning to think you're dangerous in kitchens." "I prefer the word adventurous." She shook her head. "Absolutely not." Despite every disaster, it became one of the happiest nights of my life. Later we exchanged gifts. Natalie handed me a small rectangular box wrapped in dark green paper. "I hope you like it." I carefully opened it. Inside was a leather-bound journal. Its cover was embossed with a simple compass. I looked at her. "It's beautiful." "Open it." The first page had only one sentence written in her handwriting. "Every great story deserves to be remembered. Start writing yours." For several seconds I couldn't speak. This might be the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. She smiled softly. "I wanted to give you something that would last longer than objects." I stood up and hugged her tightly. "My turn." I handed her a long, carefully wrapped package. She slowly removed the paper. Inside was an old film camera. Not brand new. Completely restored. The exact model her father had once owned. She froze. Her hands trembled. "Logan, how did you?" "I spent 2 months searching." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "You remembered?" Of course I remembered. She gently held the camera against her chest before wrapping her arms around me. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to." That night, neither of us realized we were quietly creating memories that would later become priceless. The following weeks passed peacefully. January arrived. Work became busier than ever. My company won a major architectural contract that demanded long hours and constant meetings. Natalie was also traveling more frequently for photography assignments. For the first time since we met, our schedules no longer matched. Instead of seeing each other almost every day, sometimes we managed only quick dinners or late-night phone calls. Neither of us complained. We understood. At least we thought we did. One evening, after another 12-hour workday, I arrived at Natalie's apartment carrying takeout from our favorite restaurant. She opened the door with a tired smile. "You look exhausted." "So do you. I've been editing photographs since sunrise. And I forgot what daylight looks like." She laughed quietly. We ate dinner on her couch, in comfortable silence. Halfway through the meal, I noticed she barely touched her food. "You okay?" She nodded too quickly. "Just tired." "You've said that a lot lately." "I know. You should slow down." She looked away. "I can't." "Why not?" "I hit deadlines." "So do I. But not every deadline is worth sacrificing yourself for." She smiled weakly. "You sound like my mother." "I'll take that as a compliment." She laughed, but something felt different. For the first time since we'd met, I sensed she was hiding something. I didn't push. Everyone deserves their privacy. Still, a quiet feeling settled somewhere deep inside me. Something wasn't right. A week later, we planned to spend Saturday together. We were supposed to drive to Savannah for the day. I had packed everything the night before. At 8 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Natalie. Her voice sounded unusually weak. "I'm so sorry. I don't think I can go." "What's wrong?" "I think I'm coming down with something." "Do you want me to come over?" "No. I just need sleep." "You sure?" "Yeah." "Get some rest. I'll call you later." The call ended. Something about it bothered me. Not because she canceled. Because Natalie almost never canceled plans. By afternoon, I couldn't ignore the feeling anymore. I stopped by a small bakery, bought her favorite blueberry muffins, and drove to her apartment. When she opened the door, she looked pale. Far paler than I had expected. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. "You weren't supposed to come," she said gently. "I know. I brought emergency muffins." She smiled. "Well, those are medically necessary." I stepped inside. The apartment was unusually quiet. No music. No camera equipment scattered around. No editing laptop open. Only silence. She sat down on the couch and rubbed her temples. "You really don't look well." "I'll be okay." I reached out and touched her forehead. She wasn't feverish. "Have you seen a doctor?" She hesitated. "Not yet." "Natalie, I'm serious. You've looked exhausted for weeks." "It's probably stress. Probably isn't good enough." She stared down at her hands. "I'll make an appointment." "Promise?" She nodded. "I promise." I believed her. Because until then, Natalie had never given me a reason not to. A few days later she texted me, "Doctor's appointment tomorrow. Wish me luck." I smiled and replied immediately, "You'll be fine. Call me afterward." The next afternoon, I waited for her call. 1 hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. Finally, just before evening, my phone rang. "Hey." Her voice was almost a whisper. "How did it go?" There was a long silence. "Natalie, I'm okay. But I need to see you." My heart immediately began racing. "Tell me where." "My apartment." "I'll be there in 15 minutes." I broke every speed limit on the way across town. The entire drive, one thought repeated endlessly inside my head. Please let everything be okay. Please. When I finally arrived, Natalie opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes were red. She had been crying. Without saying a single word, she stepped into my arms. I held her tightly. "What happened?" She buried her face against my chest. Her voice broke. "I don't know how to tell you." In that moment, without hearing another word, I realized our lives were about to change forever. The moment Natalie said those words, time seemed to stop. I stood there holding her, listening to the sound of her uneven breathing, while 1,000 terrifying possibilities raced through my mind. Was someone in her family hurt? Had she lost her job? Was she leaving Charleston? No matter how hard I tried to prepare myself, nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. She slowly stepped back and looked into my eyes. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. No matter what I tell you. Please let me finish." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I nodded. "I promise." She walked to the couch and sat down, twisting her hands together so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "The doctor found something during my examination." I felt my heart pounding louder with every word. "They noticed an irregular shadow." I couldn't speak. "They're not sure what it is yet. They've scheduled more tests." The room fell completely silent. I finally managed to ask, "So?" "They don't know." She shook her head. "No, but they said we can't ignore it anymore." I sat beside her and took both of her hands. "We'll get the tests. We'll find out what's going on. We'll face it together." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You always say we. Because there is no you anymore. There's us." She closed her eyes. "I was so scared to tell you." "Why?" "Because people leave when life becomes complicated." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I gently lifted her chin until she looked at me again. "Listen to me carefully. I'm not going anywhere. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Not when things become difficult. I love you. And love isn't measured by how easy life is." For the first time that evening, she smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. The following week became a blur of hospitals, waiting rooms, paperwork, and endless uncertainty. I went with her to every appointment, every scan, every consultation. Sometimes we talked while waiting. Sometimes we simply held hands in silence. There were moments when I caught Natalie staring through the hospital window for several minutes without saying a word. "What are you thinking about?" I asked one afternoon. She smiled faintly. "How strange life is." "What do you mean?" 1 month ago, I was worried about deadlines." She looked down at the hospital bracelet around her wrist. "Now all I want is to hear someone say everything is going to be okay." I squeezed her hand. "I still believe they will." She nodded. "I want to believe it too." To keep her mind occupied, I started taking her on short drives after every appointment. Sometimes we drove along the coast. sometimes through quiet neighborhoods filled with old oak trees. We rarely had a destination. The journey itself became our escape. One evening we parked near the beach where we had danced in the rain months earlier. The ocean looked calm, almost peaceful. Natalie smiled. I remember this place. You dragged me into a storm. You followed. I didn't really have a choice. You always have a choice. She looked toward the waves. You chose me. I'll keep choosing you. Every single day. She quietly leaned her head against my shoulder. A few days later, the hospital called. The final results were ready. Our appointment was scheduled for Friday morning. Neither of us slept much the night before. At breakfast, Natalie pushed her food around the plate without taking a single bite. You should eat something. I'm not hungry. You need your strength. She looked at me. What if today changes everything? I reached across the table. Then we'll face whatever comes together. You keep saying that. Because I mean it. On the drive to the hospital, neither of us turned on the radio. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy. Every traffic light felt longer than usual. Every mile felt endless. When we finally arrived, we walked into the building holding hands. The waiting room was unusually quiet. Children played in one corner. An elderly couple read magazines together. A nurse eventually called Natalie's name. We followed her down a long hallway. The doctor's office felt colder than I remembered. He greeted us kindly before sitting across from us. He opened the medical file. My heart pounded so loudly I barely heard the first few sentences. The additional tests gave us much clearer information. Natalie tightened her grip on my hand. The doctor continued speaking. Then he smiled. A genuine smile. The good news is that the shadow is not cancer. For several seconds neither of us reacted. It was as if our minds refused to process the words. Then Natalie burst into tears. Not tears of fear. Tears of overwhelming relief. I wrapped my arms around her while she cried against my shoulder. The doctor continued explaining. The shadow was caused by a rare but treatable inflammatory condition. She would need medication, regular checkups, and several months of recovery. But she was expected to make a full recovery. When we finally walked outside, the sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. Natalie looked up at the bright blue sky and laughed through her tears. I forgot what hope feels like. I smiled. I didn't. She turned toward me. You never stop believing. There were moments when I was terrified. But I never stopped believing in us. She reached into her purse. What are you doing? I bought something. She pulled out 2 folded pieces of paper. I looked closer. Plane tickets. New York. I asked. She grinned. We almost forgot how to dream. So, after I recover, we're taking the trip we've been talking about. I laughed for the first time, in what felt like forever. It's a date. She hugged me tightly. That evening we celebrated with takeout pizza on my living room floor because neither of us had the energy to cook. We laughed. We watched old movies. We planned everything we wanted to do once she felt better. For the first time in weeks, life felt normal again. As Natalie fell asleep with her head resting against my shoulder, I looked at her peaceful face and silently thanked God for giving us another chance. I truly believed the worst was behind us. I believed our biggest battle had already been won. I had no idea that the greatest challenge our love would ever face was an illness. It was a truth neither of us saw coming. The weeks after Natalie's diagnosis became some of the most meaningful days of our relationship. Her treatment was working exactly as the doctors had hoped. Little by little, the color returned to her face, the constant exhaustion began to fade, and the sparkle I loved so much slowly reappeared in her eyes. Every small improvement felt like a victory. The first morning she told me she had enough energy to go for a walk. I almost celebrated like we'd won the lottery. You are absolutely impossible, she laughed as we walked through Waterfront Park. I'm just happy. I noticed. I thought you were going to start dancing. I was considering it. She rolled her eyes. Please don't. No promises. For the first time in months, life felt peaceful again. Natalie returned to taking photographs, although she accepted fewer assignments than before. I continued working at the architectural firm, but I made a promise to myself that no project would ever become more important than the people I loved. Looking back now, that promise would soon be tested. One Saturday afternoon, Natalie suggested we finally book the hotel for our New York trip. We spent hours comparing neighborhoods, restaurants, museums, and places we wanted to visit. "I've always wanted to see Central Park in autumn," she said, "and I want to stand on top of the Empire State Building." She smiled. "Tourist." "Absolutely. What about you?" "I just want to see New York through your eyes." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You always know exactly what to say." "I mean every word." Later that evening, while Natalie was in the kitchen making tea, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. I had never looked through her phone. Not once. Trust had never been a question between us. The screen lit up. A message appeared. "Unknown number, we need to talk. You can't keep hiding this forever." I stared at the notification. My first instinct was to ignore it. Everyone deserves privacy. But before I could look away, another message appeared. "He deserves to know the truth." A chill ran through my body. Natalie walked back into the room, carrying 2 mugs. She immediately noticed my expression. "What's wrong?" I looked at the phone. It lit up. Her smile disappeared. Completely. She slowly placed the mugs on the table. "You read it." I couldn't help seeing the notification. She closed her eyes. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked quietly, "Natalie, what truth?" She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her phone, turned it over so the screen faced downward, and sat beside me. I always knew this day might come. My heartbeat grew faster. "Please. Just tell me." She looked down at her hands. "Before I met you, I was engaged." I nodded slowly. "You told me someone broke your heart." "Yes. But I never told you everything." I stayed silent. She continued. "His name was Ryan. We were together for almost 5 years. We were planning our wedding." Her voice trembled. 2 months before the ceremony, he disappeared." I frowned. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "He left. No explanation. No goodbye. Nothing." I felt anger building inside me. "That's unbelievable. It gets worse." She looked at me with tear-filled eyes. A few weeks later, I found out he had been hiding enormous gambling debts. I listened without interrupting. He had borrowed money from dangerous people. They started looking for him. When they couldn't find him, they came looking for me. I felt my stomach tighten. "They threatened you?" She nodded. "They thought I knew where he was. I didn't. I truly didn't." "So why are they contacting you now?" She swallowed hard. "Because Ryan came back." The room suddenly felt colder. "What?" "He contacted me 3 days ago." My mind raced. "What does he want?" "I don't know." I never answered. I stood and walked toward the window, trying to process everything. "So these messages, they're about him?" She nodded. "I think someone found out he contacted me." I turned back toward her. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked completely broken. "Because after everything we had already been through, I couldn't bear the thought of losing you too." I walked back toward her. She was crying openly now. I wasn't protecting myself. I was protecting us. I knelt in front of her. "Natalie." She couldn't even look at me. "I was afraid you'd think my past would become your problem." I gently lifted her face. "Look at me." Slowly she did. "I don't care about the mistakes someone else made. I care about you. I care that you carried this fear alone." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. You never needed to face this by yourself." She suddenly threw her arms around me. "I was so scared." "I know. I thought if he ever came back, he'd destroy everything." I held her tightly. "No, not while I'm here." For the first time that evening, she took a deep breath. Then she whispered something that sent another wave of concern through me. "There's one more thing." I looked at her. "He asked to meet me." "When?" She hesitated. "Tomorrow." The words echoed inside my mind. Tomorrow. I didn't know whether Ryan wanted forgiveness. Money. Or something far more dangerous. But one thing became painfully clear. The peaceful life Natalie and I had fought so hard to rebuild was about to collide with a past that had never truly disappeared. And deep inside, I had the unmistakable feeling that tomorrow would change everything. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the same questions returned. Why had Ryan come back after all these years? What did he want from Natalie? And why now, just when we had finally started rebuilding our lives? By sunrise, I had made one decision. No matter what happened, Natalie would not face this alone. The next morning, we drove to the meeting place together. Ryan had asked to meet at a quiet public park on the edge of Charleston, a place overlooking the marshes where people usually came to jog or walk their dogs. Natalie insisted that the meeting happen somewhere open, somewhere safe. As we parked the car, I could feel her hand trembling in mine. "You don't have to do this," I said softly. She looked at me. "I've spent years running from this. I'm tired of running." I nodded. "Then we'll finish it together." A tall man stood near one of the wooden benches, his hands buried in the pockets of a worn leather jacket. His face looked older than Natalie had described. Tired. Broken. The confidence he once must have had long disappeared. When he saw Natalie, he slowly walked toward us. His eyes briefly met mine. "You must be Logan." "I am." He gave a small nod. "I'm not here to cause trouble." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to believe him. Ryan turned back to Natalie. "I'm sorry." Those two words hung in the air. Natalie stared at him without saying anything. He lowered his head. "I know they don't fix anything." "They don't." Her voice was calm. "But I needed you to hear them." Ryan took a slow breath. "The people I owed money to. I finally paid every dollar. I've spent the last 4 years working in Alaska. Construction. Fishing. Anything I could find. I wanted to disappear." Natalie looked at him with quiet sadness. "You didn't disappear. You abandoned everyone who loved you." He closed his eyes. "I know. You could have told me the truth. I was ashamed. You should have been." Silence settled between them. Finally, Ryan reached into his backpack and pulled out a thick envelope. "What is that?" Natalie asked. "My final apology." He handed it to her. Inside were legal documents. The small apartment they had once planned to buy together had been sold years earlier. Ryan had somehow managed to recover Natalie's portion of the investment, along with every dollar she had lost. "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can. It belongs to you." She slowly closed the envelope. "I never wanted the money." "I know, but I owe you far more than money." Ryan looked at me. "Take care of her." I answered without hesitation. "I already do." For the first time, a faint smile crossed his face. "I can see that." He turned back toward Natalie one last time. "I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not asking for another chance. I just wanted you to know that leaving you is the greatest regret of my life." Natalie quietly wiped away a tear. After a long silence, she spoke. "I forgive you." Ryan looked stunned. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I want my past back. It means I refuse to let it control my future." For the first time, I saw peace appear on his face. He nodded. "Thank you." Without another word, he turned and slowly walked away. Neither of us watched him for long. Some chapters deserve an ending, not another beginning. Natalie stood silently beside me. "How do you feel?" I asked. She let out a long breath. Lighter. As if I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was still there. She slipped her hand into mine. "Thank you. You never left." "I promised I wouldn't." She smiled. "And you kept your promise." A month later, life finally returned to normal. Natalie's health continued improving. The mysterious messages stopped. The fear that had haunted her for years slowly disappeared. In late October, we finally took the trip to New York we had postponed. We walked through Central Park, covered in golden leaves. We watched the city lights from the top of the Empire State Building. We laughed like children in Times Square. And everywhere we went, Natalie carried the restored film camera I had given her for Christmas. One afternoon, while we were sitting on a bench overlooking the lake in Central Park, she quietly placed a camera beside her. "I've been thinking. That usually means something important." She smiled. "It does." She reached into her coat pocket. Instead of pulling out a photograph, she handed me a tiny velvet box. I stared at it in complete surprise. "Natalie." She laughed nervously. "I know. This isn't traditional. I don't care." She took a deep breath. "You once told me that every great story deserves to be remembered. You remember?" "I remember everything." She opened the box. Inside were 2 simple silver rings. People nearby smiled as they quietly realized what was happening. Natalie looked into my eyes. "I've spent most of my life waiting for someone who would stay." Her voice trembled. "You stayed. You loved me when I was healthy. You loved me when I was terrified. You loved me even when my past came looking for me." A tear rolled down my cheek. "So, Logan Whitmore, will you marry me?" For several seconds I couldn't speak. Then I laughed through my tears. "I was supposed to ask you. You took too long." I smiled. "Then my answer is yes." The people around us applauded as I slipped the ring onto her finger. Then she placed mine on my hand. I kissed her beneath the golden autumn trees, while strangers cheered for 2 people whose story they would probably never know. A year later, we were married in Charleston. Not in a grand cathedral, not in a luxury resort, but on the same quiet beach where we had once danced together in the rain. Our closest friends and family surrounded us. Mason stood beside me as my best man. Chloe cried before the ceremony had even begun. Natalie walked toward me with the restored camera hanging from her bouquet, a quiet tribute to her father. When we exchanged our vows, I looked into her eyes and realized something. Love was never about finding someone with a perfect past. It was about finding someone who chooses to walk beside you, no matter how complicated the road becomes. Today, years later, that old journal Natalie gave me is almost full. Every page tells another chapter of our life together. Trips, arguments, dreams, laughter, ordinary mornings, extraordinary memories. And every now and then, I still open to the very first page, where her handwriting reminds me of the sentence that changed my life forever. Every great story deserves to be remembered. She was right, because this story was never just about how I met the woman I loved. It was about how love taught 2 imperfect people that the strongest relationships are not built by avoiding storms. They are built by choosing to hold each other's hand until the storm finally passes. The end.